What's going on, guys? Today I'm going to show you guys how to do a valve adjustment on your J Series Honda V6. Alright guys, so this procedure that I'm going to show you is literally going to apply to 25 years of Honda V6 engines. This series of engine debuted in '96 and they're still in production in 2021. So they made a 3-liter, they made a 3.2, they made a 3.5, they also made a 3.7. So like I said, there's 25 different model years using this engine that this procedure is going to cover. So obviously there may be some subtle variations as far as your access to fasteners and things like that, but for the most part all these are pretty much the same. Doesn't really matter if you have an Odyssey, a Ridgeline, a Pilot, or Acura TL. They're all pretty similar. So yeah, I'm gonna walk you guys through it. All right guys, so we're gonna dive right into this. For you guys' own knowledge, the vehicle that I'm working on is a 2002 Acura TL, but specifically, that's the vehicle that I'm working on. So your access to certain fasteners, obviously may vary. So first thing I'm gonna do, 10mm wrench, I'm just gonna disconnect the battery. Take this cruise control cable loose. We're gonna pull the air box, the beauty cover, obviously. So I've got 4 8mm fasteners holding in the air box. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get the 10mm fasteners off the top of this plastic cover. Get the plastic cover out of the way. Up here in the front, pull this plastic cover off. Just a couple quarter turn fasteners. This should pretty much pull up and out of the way, just like that. Next thing I'm going to disconnect is going to be some of these vacuum hoses from the throttle body, PCV. This stuff pulled out of the way, that pulled off of there. We're going to disconnect this air intake tube. Map sensor up on the top, the throttle position sensor here on the side. So to disconnect the throttle cables, what you're going to do is pull the throttle open as far as you can, and then pull the slack out of the cable. If you look in the side of the bracket, there's going to be a slot that the cable will pop through. Just like so. I understand it's kind of hard to see with my fingers in the way, but this one will be easier. So this is the cruise control. The throttle cable is going to be the exact same way. So pull the slack out of or open the throttle all the way, take the slack on the cable, work it through the slot, and just pop it out. Pull some of this, the wiring out of the way. And then you have a Phillips head screw that holds that intake tube on. wiring harness down here underneath the tube. It's holding it in place. This wiring harness right here. Set that out of the way. Now, obviously, if the vehicle you're working with has electronic throttle, throttle cables just obviously is going to unplug because it's drive-by-wire instead of drive-by cable. But underneath the throttle body, there's a couple more connections down here that we got to take off because I'm going to pull the intake and the throttle body all as one piece up off the engine. So if you have throttle cables like I do, I'm going to pull the bracket with the cables already attached. It just seems easier to pull the bracket rather than, you know, try and readjust the cables. Lay that off to the side. So underneath the throttle body, there are a couple hoses on this thing. I'm going to pull those hoses off. So on the back side of the intake, there's a couple things we got to remove. There's a few hoses and one electrical connection over here. All right, so finally to remove the intake itself, you have these 10mm bolts holding this cover on. So you're going to pull the cover and the gasket. All right, so in the center of the intake, holding the intake on, you have 9 12mm bolts. You should be able to pretty much lift the intake off the motor, and there really shouldn't be anything holding it on. If there is, obviously remove it. So I got fresh gaskets for this thing. I'll link them down in the description for you guys that are doing this at home. So obviously while I'm in here, I'm going to replace all the gaskets in the intake from here up, as well as the valve cover gaskets. All right, now at this point, before you go any further or take anything else off, before you cause yourself a world of headaches, get out some tape, put some tape over the ports. Because if you drop anything down in there, you're pulling a cylinder head. And believe me, that's a lot more involved than doing a valve adjustment. So to remove this rear valve cover, obviously as you guys can see, I've got a wiring harness in the way. I've got a few 10mm bolts that are holding the wiring harness to the valve cover. So I'm going to pull these bolts out, hopefully be able to stretch this harness, you know, far enough out of the way that I can get in here to do what I need to do. I'm going to take this, this power steering hose off. It's also attached to the valve cover. Now, if the power steering hose is still in the way, you can disconnect the two hose or the two bolts on the pump up here at the top of the screen, and just stuff the hose, you know, back behind this bar. And stick it up here by the windshield, you know, put a rag over it so it doesn't drip anywhere. Next thing I'm going to unbolt back at the back is going to be the coils. The coils are held in with a 6mm Allen bolt on this particular car. Alright, so finally I got all the coils out, wiring harness is loose, power steering pump hose is out of the way. Next thing I'm going to go after is the 5 valve cover bolts. So these are all 10mm. The valve cover is loose. Now I got to try and wiggle it out of here. All right, now to get this valve cover out of here, once it's loose, pick up on it. You're gonna have to stretch this harness a little bit. There's no way around that. And then you should be able to pull it out on the driver's side over here. So that was the rear. The front should be pretty much the same deal. All right, so you've got everything torn down, but there's one more thing that you're gonna have to disassemble to perform the valve adjustment. So you're gonna have to come over to the passenger side front tire, remove the wheel, and if you go through the splash shield with a 19mm socket, you can get in there to the crank bolt, and that's how you're gonna turn the engine over. Make sure you're only turning the engine clockwise as you're spinning it over. I already went ahead and adjusted the valves on the backside just because it's so much easier for you guys to see the front, and I'm going to walk you guys through how to do one cylinder, and if you can do one cylinder, you can do the other 6. It's really not that hard. One thing I did do to make it easier to turn the engine over, so I removed all the spark plugs. I'm going to be replacing them anyway, so it just made sense. So to actually, adjust the valves on this thing, what you're going to do is you're going to come over here to this passenger side cam cover, or the timing belt cover over here, and right here in the side of it, there's going to be a black plug that you can pull out, and you look in the hole at the cam gear, and the cam gear is going to have a number on it. So the number that's listed on the cam gear is the cylinder number that you are going to adjust the valves on. So the cylinder numbers go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So right now I have cylinder number 4 listed on the cam gear. So cylinder 4 is ready to be adjusted. So to adjust the valves, first thing you're going to do is loosen the jam nut. Get the jam nut loose. So your intake valves are going to be here toward the middle of the engine on both banks. So the rear bank, they're going to be toward the center. The front bank, they're going to be again toward the center. So the intake valves, I'll put the specs down in the corner so you guys can see them. But what you're going to do is you're going to take your feeler gauge, get it in between the rocker arm and the tip of the valve. And this is when that weird screwdriver that always comes with every set kind of comes into its own because it's so small, especially on those back cylinders. So what you're going to do is you're going to tighten this down. Until it's snug. Now you can still move the feeler gauge back and forth, and that's what you want. You don't want it, you know, obviously so tight that you can't get the gauge out of there. So you're going to loosen that up and just till it's snug. And you should be able to still move it back and forth. Once that's done, what you're going to do, take your 10mm wrench again, tighten up the jam nut. Remove your feeler gauge. That one's done. So I got to do the same thing to this one. And there it's too tight. You just loosen it just a little bit. And there the gauge is able to move and tighten your jam nut. They really shouldn't take that much adjustment at all. So there, those two intake valves are set. You're going to repeat that same procedure on the exhaust valves. Now the exhaust valves, due to the amount of heat that the exhaust valves see, there's different clearance needed. So I'll put that clearance down in the corner for you guys. And some of these you may check and they really may not be that far off. But let's face it, if you're in here this far, you might as well, you know, check them and adjust them. I personally like setting them a little tight rather than a little loose, because if they're a little loose, they make noise. If they're a little tight, a worst case scenario, you'll have a misfire. But realistically, you would have to get them very tight before you would notice that. Doing the ones on the rear cylinder, especially the exhaust valves on the outside, it's really kind of a pain. Especially when you're dealing with, you know, this boss right here for the valve cover bolt on the backside. It's really in the way. The wiring harness is in the way. Just not a fun time, especially, you know, trying to record it. That's why I'm only showing you guys this one cylinder, because if you can do one, there's no reason you can't do the other 5. So there you go, cylinder 4 is done. All right guys, at this point I'm ready to put everything back together. I've got all my valves adjusted, all my jam nuts are torqued. I did some other stuff while I was in here, so I'm going to replace the valve cover gaskets, the spark plug tube seals. I put fresh spark plugs in it, and I'm going to put you know, fresh intake gaskets from basically this point up on the intake. So I've got all that stuff done off camera. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and get this rear valve cover bolted up. So my valve cover is bolted down, wiring harness is secure. Checked my spark plug tube seals with a mirror, and those were in good shape. Look like they're going to seal. So I'm going to go ahead and get the coils put back in. All right, now the front valve cover. All right, now at this point, both valve covers are bolted up, all the coils are back in. Next thing we gotta do is the intake. So I'm gonna remove my tape. In pieces, evidently. And you really wanna make sure the surface is clean, so I'm gonna have to remove some of this adhesive. The gasket that goes on here is sort of like a head gasket, like it's a multi-layer steel. So make sure you got all the adhesive and all the crud off of there before you slap your gasket on there. So I got that all clean. Get your gasket on there, like so. Now before you go throwing the intake on here, make sure the surface that mates with that gasket is clean as well. Once you have that done, go ahead and put the intake back in place. So you saw those two studs that are sticking up. Those get the two 12mm nuts. Like that, just to hold that intake down. And we'll get this thing torqued down. I'll get you guys the torque sequence and the spec. One quick note here, guys, before I go putting this top plenum back on. If you guys look right here, there's 6 holes in the top of this intake for EGR. This car in particular, everything was pretty well carboned up. So when I had the sides of the intake off to change the gaskets and the sides of the intake, I ran a screwdriver down through here, cleaned everything out, blew everything out, made sure I didn't get any carbon down in the intake where it's going to get sucked into the motor. and then went ahead and put the sides on. One other thing in regards to that EGR is the passages in the bottom side of this plenum. So as you guys can see, I went through with a screwdriver, cleaned all these passages out, blew everything out with a blow nozzle, got everything nice and clean so it'll run for, you know, another 100,000 miles without any problem. So to put the top of this back together, take your plenum gasket, lay your plenum gasket in there. You know, make sure the bottom side of your the top of the plenum is clean. Set that down just like so. So we get our intake bolted down. Next thing we got to do is basically just start connecting up hoses. So I'm going to do these couple down here on the bottom of the throttle body. All right, guys, so as you guys can see, I'm pretty much all back together with the exception of the, you know, the two covers or whatever. I'll put links in the description to, you know, the gaskets, the tools, anything that you would need to basically, you know, be able to get this job done. Yeah, with that, I'll fire it up for you guys. But as always, guys, if you guys like the video, hit like. If you want to see more content, go down and hit subscribe. Thanks for watching, guys.